What's going on, everybody? On Friar Podcast, coming to you from a Thursday afternoon. He is Todd Strain. I am Darnay Tripp. Padres just took 2 of 3 from the Dodgers. It's not nearly as exciting as it should be.
I thought you were flexing your muscles there for a little bit.
I don't have much to flex, but if you had told anybody that the Padres were going to take 2 of 3 in mid-September from the Dodgers months ago, I think we would have expected it to be a whole lot more significant. But alas, it is significant from one standpoint. Blake Snell, nice statement in his pursuit of a second career Cy Young. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But I thought, you know what, Todd? You've been part of these conversations. We've had a lot of these conversations. They've kind of been about a lot of the same topics. And, you know, how much can we beat a dead horse, so to speak? So I opened it up to the Twitter sphere and said, what are you guys curious about? What do you guys want to discuss? What do you guys want to hear us talk about? And got a bunch of replies. And so we're going to go down the list of those replies, a mailbag, sort of, so to speak, Twitter or X. I'm still going with Twitter. I can't call it X.
Yeah,
I think
I'm out on X. I'm out on X. I'm with you, Twitter, Darnay.
Yeah, the icon, I still have the bird app on my phone, the bird icon. So I'm proud about that. Holding on for dear life. So a Twitter mailbag of sorts. And I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of the same topics that we've discussed, but I just wanted to put it out there for the people. What are you guys curious about? And then we'll launch into it and see where we go. So excited about this. Excited to be with you. Thanks to OG's, the sponsor of the On Friar Podcast. For over 30 years, OG's has been crafting award-winning microbrews with over 60 medals in international, national, and regional competitions. OG's, one of the most decorated breweries in the world, with each OG's location having 12 proprietary OG's beers on tap. They're constantly updating their menu. They did that this year, bringing in items to keep OG's fresh and on trend. You can take advantage of OG's loyalty program. It's super easy. You can do it online, earn loyalty points, rewards, and exclusive offers, all of which leads to fun and free food. And ordering online from OG's is easier than ever. You can get OG's straight to your door. And we appreciate, Todd, you're a big part of the OG's local slice every week. We appreciate what they do for us on the TV side on football night in San Diego, which week 1 this past Sunday, and we are trucking along. What is it? Dolphins Patriots, I believe, Sunday night. So the crew will be with you to break down that one and everything else from week 2. So excited about that. But we are here to talk about the Padres. So without further ado, the walk-up music. What's up, everybody? This is the On Friar Podcast, brought to you by NBC 7. Here we are, Todd, mid-September. How many games do we have left? It's like...
It's whatever it is. It's too many, Darnay. Make it end. Make it end.
Is it too many? Padres off to Oakland. Then they return home for final homestand of the season. What are we at now? I'm not going to be able to do this math quickly enough, but there aren't many games left, and that's probably for the best, just given how this season has gone. I think people are ready to kind of move on and see what happens. Hope is lost at this point, even though they are not technically out of it. Yeah, 3 against Oakland back home, 3 against the Rockies, and 3 against the Cardinals, and so that's it. 15 games to go in the season. They finish at the Giants and then at the White Sox. So October 1st, Sunday, October 1st, which, mind you, is my birthday. Wow. And so maybe, I don't know what kind of birthday gift they could provide at this point. You know what I mean? It's like
the end of the season. That's a gift.
Well, I was going to go there, but I mean, you're probably right. If we're being completely honest. So yeah, home stretch, that's where we are. And we've said it a couple times, like you're just in this weird kind of purgatory where we're waiting for something to happen, and I think a few weeks ago, I'd started to think, if I heard that Bob Melvin was fired tomorrow morning, like I wouldn't necessarily be shocked, and that hasn't happened. And since that hasn't happened to this point, I don't expect that to happen between now and the end of the season. Um, Obviously, the big kind of roster questions and moves, you got to wait till the offseason. And so the time will come to discuss that. I want to do eventually a who should stay and who should go pod, because I think this would be an interesting year to do that, given what we've seen from a lot of guys. And I know there will be some strong opinions on that, so I think that would be a fun one. But we're just not there yet,
No.
And I also don't know how much interest people have in, like, let's really get into Blake Snell's Cy Young. Like, we'll discuss it. It came up. Derek and I spoke about it last week, and he's kind of like out on this Blake Snell Cy Young train. But I'm interested in it, and I think, hey, anytime your team has a guy that has a chance to win a Cy Young, even if there's a good chance he's moving on, even if he's been frustrating to watch at points, like, it hasn't happened very often in the history of a franchise. It doesn't come around very often. It feels like something that you should kind of get behind and have interested in. But are we going to discuss that for an hour? Probably not.
One thing I will say about this whole Blake Snell Cy Young thing, is he deserving? Yes. But what jumps out to me is he hasn't pitched an inning this year that really matters in big picture of what you're trying to do in Major League Baseball, which is win your division and get into the postseason. The Padres have never really played a meaningful game in that aspect. So Blake Snell might win a Cy Young without, quote unquote, pitching a meaningful inning.
Yeah, I mean, they were meaningful early in the season, right? I mean, it's of late now where there's a little less weight on them as they go to Houston. I mean, I think what he has to his benefit is, like, you go to Houston, you go to the Dodgers. He had a chance, according to AJ Cassavell, to bump his start back to Oakland. He said, "No, I want to face the best." But your point is well taken. I think that's kind of the tricky thing with some of these baseball awards is it can be such an individual sport, and they're it's not always tied into team success. And now that team success certainly helps, but this is one of those cases where it's kind of independent of that. Obviously, the Padres benefit from Blake Snell having like a 1.3 ERA his last 20 starts or whatever it is, some obscure number. But it's not going to launch them into the postseason,
No.
which is too bad. And one thing that I've kind of been thinking about it, maybe just because we're kind of getting towards the end here, that I'm a little bit bummed out about. Like, Blake Snell is fun to cover,
He is.
he's got a great personality, great interview. Um, he's very relatable, and everybody sees the clips with Don and Mud. He's not quite like that with us in the clubhouse to that extent, but he's very personable and easy to talk to, and cracks a smile and cracks a joke here or there, which we appreciate. So it'll be a bummer if he does kind of move on, because, like, that's part. I don't know how important this is to the fan base, but for us, it's when you have people that are fun to talk to and relatable, like, it makes the job more fun. And not just Blake Snell, but Bob Melvin. I mean, Bob Melvin is probably one of the more enjoyable coaches that I've been around in my professional career period, especially at kind of a more professional, from a more professional standpoint. He's just been a joy. And it's like, people up in the Bay Area raved about him before he came down here. And, he's been all that with us, and he just gets it. He gets how to relate to us. A lot of baseball coaches get really, really into the kind of the weeds of the sport, and he does. But he also knows, like, for us TV folks, like, every so often you just need like a good 20 to 30-second soundbite about like the environment or this or that. And some coaches don't necessarily want to play along, but Bob Melvin is the type that does. Like, he knows what you're looking for. He doesn't make it hard on you. He's very, very easy to deal with and relate to. And so he's been very enjoyable to cover from our standpoint. And so if this is the end for Bob Melvin, that's, again, I don't know how much the fan base cares about this. For me
Yeah.
personally, I'll be sad to see him go because he's been a joy to cover.
Yeah, and let's start with the first one there, Snell. As I think fans do care because they hear these comments too. And as much as we love a lot of the players in the Padres clubhouse, a lot of players on this current team will just give you the traditional PR spin, very vanilla answer, no matter what happens. Blake Snell does not do that. He tells you what's on his mind. He tells you about how he didn't think Gary Sanchez was a good catcher before. Now he's really surprised that Gary Sanchez is a good catcher. He talks about facing Sanchez as when they're on opposing teams and what that means to him now. Stuff he gives you is not your normal, just bland, blah, blah. It's interesting. It's informative. And sometimes you got to do a double take where you say, hey, did he really say that? And he did. And so that's interesting. So I think Padre fans will miss that because when you see personality from guys or when you see something different is oftentimes when fans, I want to say, fall more in love, or have a little closer attachment to the team because someone on their team that they like is a little bit different or gives them a little something that they didn't expect. So I think that's definitely on point with Snell and Melvin. I agree with you. He's just savvy. He's savvy, and when you compare him to the previous two Padre managers and what their press conferences sounded like and what messages they were trying to communicate, they were very, very hard to listen to and didn't make a lot of sense. And I don't think a lot of people believed him. When Melvin talks, he has some insight, he has some professionalism, and I think he's believable and he'll give you an honest answer.
Yeah, and I think Tingler was generally pretty good, and I only had one season with Andy Green, and he was fine. But Bob Melvin is as easy as they come, and you have certain people that just seems like they kind of want to make it difficult for you, and you have to like offer up this like perfectly crafted or worded question, or they'll like give you a hard time, or they won't give you a direct answer. But it's like when I'm talking to you, Todd, I might clumsily ask you a question, but what I'm getting
Yeah,
to, and so you give me the
100%.
answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Other people aren't so courteous, and Bob Melvin is one of those types that he's willing to play along, and we appreciate that. All right, let's get to the tweets. Let's get to the questions and what folks had to say about this Padres season, what they were curious about. Because I got a bunch of different replies, and so we'll see where this goes.
I'm excited for this, Darnay. I was following along on Twitter or X last night, and I like some of the questions and perspective. So I'm ready.
At Preller's Burner, I can't say your name, but at Preller's Burner, why AJ should stay, perhaps. Chances it signals a rebuild and ruins chance to extend Soto or signed Devers. Is that who he's talking about? He's built relationships with Snell and Hader, has never gone to arbitration. He's been a player's GM with the opt-outs, et cetera, et cetera. Something different. I think what he's getting to is like AJ has done things differently. He's bucked some trends. I think going back to 2019, Tatis and Paddock coming up, Abrams starting with the opening day roster, that sort of thing, not playing the service time game, manipulating things like we've seen other teams do. And so credit to him. The relationships with Snell and Hader, I mean, I don't know what the relationship is with Snell. Like they haven't had any discussions about an extension.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure about that. Hader, I don't know if it makes sense to sign him no matter how good he is. You're just paying too much for a closer. Yeah, I don't know. I think there is something to be said for what he's done, the way he's continued to restock the farm system. Obviously, he's pulled off big trades and landed a lot of star players. So there's certainly some feathers in his cap, so to speak, from that standpoint. Is that enough to kind of overshadow some of the clumsiness with kind of roster construction and all that? A lot is said about, and I'm sure this will come up, kind of use of analytics, player development. You hear things about him kind of being a micromanager and all that. That stuff is hard to know, like not really being in it. You're just kind of going based on like reports and speculation and all that. So I don't know. I mean, look, he's certainly done some good things, but if you just look at how the team has fared through the course of his, now 9 or so years. There's a lot left to be desired when it comes to results on the field. And as Scott Miller mentioned a couple episodes ago, like very few GMs get a chance to hire a fourth manager.
Yeah.
Usually by now, it's not so much the manager, it's the guy that's doing the hiring.
Yeah, I think the ultimate question for this is if Preller moves on, if Seidler makes that determination, that shifts an organizational change, which is wide ranging and has huge implications and big change across the whole organization from the minor league levels, scouting all the way to the big league to who you're batting every day in the 7th inning against a left-hander out of the bullpen. If you keep Preller, you are essentially doubling down on everything he's done. And you're also doubling down on the Soto move because, as we know, Soto is going into the last year of his contract. So Seidler needs to make a decision. Is he going to make these huge organizational changes now? Or is he going to give it essentially one more year because Soto's going into that contract walk year? And we're going to see. And we're going to try to make it right next year. And then we revisit it. I lean towards the latter. I think he's going to be back. Because of what's at stake next year, contract wise and player options. Everyone in Padre Nation goes round and round on this. You can make a change. The case has been laid out, as you said, for all the reasons to make a change. And I think that would make sense. But something tells me that they're going to give it run one more year back and delay the decision on Preller for one more year.
Yeah. Scott Miller also mentioned, and he, I hadn't thought about this, but, and I don't know what these GM contracts are generally like, but he brought up the fact that after the 2020 season, they extended Preller through 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, not only are they handing out these long-term contracts for players, they're doing it for the front office as well. And, I don't know the terms of kind of the buyouts and that sort of thing, but could that make it difficult or make Peter Seidler less likely to move him because they have him in this long-term contract and there could be some financial implications with moving on from him. And so, Scott's point was like, your maneuverability is maybe restricted a little bit when you have somebody in a long-term contract. And also I think Bob Melvin's a buyout would be like $4 million. And so maybe that's not that much in the big scheme of things, but for a franchise that like there's starting to be a little more concern kind of kicked up about just like where they're at financially, might that be a roadblock to deciding, we're going to move on from Bob Melvin. I think there is a timeline where they say, and there's a run it back question coming up, but there is a timeline where they say, instead of having to pay a buyout for him and then pay a new manager who we're maybe not that sure about. He's going in the last year of his deal. Let's just ride it out. We'll avoid any bad PR of, firing or letting go of one of the more respected guys in the game. And just hope that a lot of kind of the quirky aspects of the season, the anomalies statistically correct themselves. And this team looks like it did in 2022.
Yeah. And ultimately it might, with regards to who's managing this team next year, it might be up to Bob Melvin. I mean, a lot of managers who are as accomplished in the game as Melvin is, they're not coming back for a lame duck season. They're not coming back without a contract extension. So you may have some sort of standoff in the offseason where the Padres and Melvin come to some sort of unique agreement that's different than most veteran managers, or Bob Melvin says, hey, I'm not coming, and they almost force him to resign by not giving him a contract extension. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And I think there's a lot of people that have watched Bob Melvin this season been like, he doesn't look like he's having a lot of fun. I don't know if Bob Melvin wants to be back, and some of that kind of goes back to like the relationships and just the chemistry and dynamics within, from Bob Melvin to the front office, AJ Preller, that we just don't, we can make guesses about and make assumptions, but like, we don't really know. You hear certain things, but it's just hard to tell. Our buddy Jim Russell just said Trent Grisham. That's all he said. So that maybe
He's not alone.
Maybe we save that for the stay or go pod. But I know the opinions of Trent Grisham. They're strong right now. At taking his time, the case to make minor tweaks and run it back for 2024, which I do. I mean, you could probably make a very compelling case for that because of the stuff that people are tired of hearing about, like run differential and, um, you know, staff ERA. And, there's a lot of different kind of statistics that you can handpick that say, oh, this team should be hard hit balls. This sort of a bunch of players over like a certain OPS plus or WRC plus, like there's obviously a case to be made and a school of thought that this season's just kind of a fluke and it's all just kind of come down to situational stuff that it's hard to project. And if you go back to zero and wipe the slate clean, does this season play out exactly as it has? Like, probably not. And so I think that would be the case for, let's hit reset, see where we're at, keep Melvin, keep Preller, keep the stars. Maybe there's changes in center field. Maybe there's some smarter DH signings made. You know what I mean? Maybe some of the guys like Jackson Merrill come up in the system and they're ready to kind of help out and contribute. And this is a more well-rounded roster. I think Pomeranz is coming off the books, potentially Snell and Hader. 1 year closer to getting Eric Hosmer off the books. So there's going to be some, I would think, maneuverability there. Now, some of that's going to go to Soto, and then, Tatis's number goes up, but I'm sure that's going to, I don't know if Machado's is level or what, same with Bogarts, but so you have to count for that as well. But I think there's going to be some money to kind of play with and smooth out some of the edges, so to speak.
I fully understand all the complaints about the lack of roster depth. Some of the signings they've made, the seemingly lack of analytics supplied in helping the or helping the coaching staff and the players. Those are all valid. To me, they're going to run it back. They should run it back because all those things you touched on. I think the season's kind of an anomaly. These are good players for the most part. Padres still have a better roster than the majority of baseball. If you play this season again, they would be better. Is the roster flawed? Are there flaws in the organization? Yes. But I don't think, because of the financial structure of the contracts, I don't see a roadmap to remake this roster and make it better in 1, 2, 3 years. You can remake the roster and make it better way down the road, but then there's no point of having some of the guys on this roster. I think you have to run it back and just hope and pray that it's going to be better. I think that's your best option. I think that's the option that makes the most sense. And I think that's the option that the Padres want to do. But as we touched on, you can sell me on anything, but I think that's the option that makes the most sense.
I don't think I've heard you say that, Todd. I think you're unveiling this take to us live. Oh, by the way, if you are watching live on YouTube, make sure to get in the chat. Let us know what you think. We'll get to your comments and thoughts. And so thanks for doing that. Thanks for watching there, listening in your podcast app, or watching on the NBC7 streaming channel. Yeah, you caught my attention. My eyes got kind of wide there because I don't think I'd heard you kind of express that before.
I just don't see how you can remake this roster. No, you're not getting anything for Xander Bogaerts. You're not getting anything for Juan Soto. You have no pitching depth to trade. I mean, what are you trading where you're getting anything? Trading Hassan Kim doesn't help you. No one's taking Jake Cronenworth. So, I mean, your best option is to run it back and hope everyone does a little bit better. I mean, somebody give me a plan or a way to remake or reshape this team that's better next year instead of running it back. And I'm willing to listen to it. I just don't think that exists feasibly.
Yeah, and I think you're right in that they're kind of locked into running it back in terms of like player personnel. I was listening to Darren Smith on the way in, and his point was like, well, when people say run it back, does that include the manager, or is this strictly with the players? And so I think that's where you could see it playing out differently. And I would be curious. Now, I'm sure you would think in a situation like this, conversations are being had with clubhouse leaders and star players and like, hey, what do you think? Like, do we need a new voice, this or that? Hopefully there's conversations with Bob Melvin, get his kind of outlook on the situation, and then see where everything aligns, and make your decision accordingly. Maybe that decision's already been made. I don't know. I guess my one concern is, like, is there anything from the season that would kind of carry over negatively? Like, is there any sort of, like, has I think about, like, and it's a completely different situation because Andy Reid was in Philadelphia for a very, very long time. But there came a point where it seemed like Andy Reid had just kind of lost the locker room. His voice wasn't resonating the same way, and an objectively very, very, very good coach, but it's time to move on. And we've obviously seen what he's done now, winning 2 Super Bowls in Kansas City. Like, he knows what he's doing. Very real chance that Bob Melvin gets a job and has immediate success somewhere, because he's a really good manager. Based on what everybody says, and what you've seen. It's just been a weird season. But is there any kind of just, like, we just don't connect with the guy, voice isn't resonating, need a new approach, whatever? I guess that would be my concerns. Like, when everybody gets together at spring training, are we feeling confident? Are we feeling, like, together and motivated and feeling like we can really turn this thing around? Or does it continue to have just kind of like a weird, uneasy, spiritless vibe, to this group?
Bob Melvin can be a good manager, and Bob Melvin can be the wrong manager for the Padres in 2024. Both things can be true.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as you said, you are a good manager. He's proven that. He was a good manager for this team last year. He may not be a good manager for this team next year. Something happened, the dynamic changed within the clubhouse, within the players, within the roster, and within Melvin's relationship. I think that's clear with the players. So fair. It's fair. Sometimes relationships just don't work out. Sometimes relationships between coach and sports teams have run their course. Sometimes it's quicker than usual. And I think a lot of people would be surprised that this relationship between Melvin and his team have turned this way. But it happens. And not being in that locker room every day, not being in, so when the door is closed, we have no idea what exactly that has made this so strange this year. But there's definitely something amiss there.
Yeah. At B Mets, I want an improved analytics department and an improved focus on developing a unified and identifiable Padres approach, culture, and identity within the organization. The roster needs a healthy combination of drafted system guys who complement the acquired guys. There's a lot there. I think one thing this season has crystallized is the need to have guys that have kind of come up together, and kind of have that bond, maybe have a little bit more, like, hunger and desire. Those guys would obviously then be on kind of team friendly contracts for a while. So there's a benefit there. And so I think that's, I think we've started to kind of see, okay, like, you might be able to acquire a bunch of talent through trades and all that. But what impact does that have on the clubhouse dynamic? And, I think you do see teams where, like, players kind of came up together and all that. And there's just kind of a bond and a unity there that doesn't seem to be in place with this team. Yeah, I just, the analytics stuff is, again, I think one of those things where, like, you hear certain things about, but it's just hard to tell. Oh, there he is. I asked Fernando to grab me my notepad. I meant to get my notepad. We should give a shout out to, the producer of the On Friar podcast, Fernando Ramirez. Does a fantastic job for us. And if you're into wrestling, if you're interested in a certain football team up north, check out the Compas podcast empire, because they're constantly churning out lots of good content. So appreciate Fernando. So yeah, analytics, it's like, it's just hard to really know, and I feel like they're probably just kind of like middle of the pack, but certainly not, the more advanced. And I think that's sort of the sense that you get, and maybe that would help. But then you hear people that, and granted, these are players that probably aren't going to speak too candidly, but you hear guys say, "Oh, we got everything we need. We've got all the information we need." And so, is that the case? I don't know. I would love, like, a player who's been around to a bunch of different places to be like, I had this here. I didn't have this with the Padres. I had this here. This wasn't communicated to me. And I feel like there haven't been too many like really rock solid examples of that, as much as it is kind of like a topic with this team.
Yeah, that tweet was right on. They need to improve their analytics department. They need to improve how they do things. You hear a lot about there's no Padre way. Sure, if you have a way of doing things, that always helps. It's a benefit. And if you have a farm system that is not just like star talent heavy, but if you have some guys who you could call up to start a game here and there and not feel like you're falling off a cliff, organizational depth is basically what we're talking about here. And guys at the minor league level that aren't, 5-star top of the line prospects, but guys that just can come up and fill in and keep you level for a few weeks is of course an added benefit. And those are all things that the Padres have failed on the last few years. Watching the game last night, the Dodgers, like their staff has been decimated this year,
Yeah.
absolutely decimated, but they've gone to their minor league system and they found starting pitchers to fill the gaps. We know Bobby Miller is a superstar in the making, but the other guys have just kind of come up and held the fort. The Padres don't have that in their minor league system. So all those things that were mentioned in the tweet were excellent points and things that the Padres need to improve on and need to get better at.
Yes. I feel like if they do change direction, um there's a guy and thinking about the Dodgers, there's a guy that I brought up before they hired Melvin, but he would have been another first time manager um if they actually do a real search and it's not just Ryan Flaherty. I feel like why would you not look at Mark Pryor?
I knew you were going there. Yeah,
Because, you talk about pitching, in that system, I mean, both
yeah,
pitching and hitting, he's probably got some insight as to, like, how they and I know Lance Lynn has tailed off, I'm sure Jason Hayward has tailed off, I
yeah,
don't know, Trace Thompson doesn't seem to be doing but, like, they've been able to get these guys in, at least in small spurts, like, tap into something to make them kind of, like,
yeah,
elevate them a little bit, and so maybe you could add some insight there, and obviously from the pitching piece. You do have Ruben Niebla, what happens with Ruben, so there's kind of that dynamic too, like, you bring in a pitching coach to be a manager, you have a pitching coach, do their visions and kind of all that align, but, having gone through this again and seeing the Dodgers, like, yeah, in a year where they were supposed to be kind of a little bit down, still be in the position that they're in, the consistency and stuff there, it's like they brought in Michael Berdar as the hitting coach from the Giants and like, well, we'll see what's going on in that Giants organization. That was coming
yeah.
after 2021. That's great. Didn't lead to anything. I'd be kind of curious, like, what's going on in that Dodgers organization, and is there something there that you can bring here? Because obviously that continues to work, and whether it is developing young guys or just acquiring veterans and kind of squeezing every ounce out of them, they do that at a higher level than the Padres, and that's part of why there continues to be a gap between those two franchises.
Yeah, Mark Pryor would be an excellent choice. I'm sure he's getting lots of managerial buzz at different levels, stealing from the Dodgers, getting some secrets. That would be optimal as well. The thing is, you bring it up. If they make a change, they're going to have to balance the equation whether they think they're getting the best manager or whether they think they're getting the best manager who their players want, i.e., one or two players we're talking about here, Tatis and Machado, who those guys want as their manager. That holds a lot of sway in the organization. That is often the case how teams do business, especially when you have two players with that much say and sway that are signed to long-term deals. Um, Keeping Ruben Niebla, whether there's a change or not, is a huge, huge thing that needs to be priority number one. So you bring up some interesting things there, Darnay. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot to consider. It's not just you make a change and that guy's great. There are guys in the clubhouse that have a say on who they want to play for and who they're going to respond to.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of like culture and identity, you have a lot of like really excitable players, but like the baseline needs to be higher. Like I want them to bring somebody that just like brings the juice every single game. You know what I mean? That has like almost an annoying energy level. Because there are such lulls with this team. I mean, they can be like on fire and like as fun and as entertaining and appear to be having fun and all that, and then just be like so down and just again spiritless and all that. Like I, you talk about makeup a lot with baseball. It's like I would be looking at guys that like who's going to provide a little more juice and a little more energy so that like when maybe things are down a little bit, you still have that guy that's kind of like pumping guys up and keeping spirits a little bit higher. Maybe that's kind of
One
like a corny little league way of looking at it, but I
no,
feel like this team is because like as good as like Xander Bogaerts doesn't really seem to have that personality. Manny Machado, again, when things are great, Fernando Tatis Jr., like he's a great source of energy and joy. But when it's been a tough couple weeks, like Juan Soto, like again, doesn't really necessarily have that type of like vibe to him. There's just like something that's kind of been missing from that standpoint. Maybe Luke Voigt was an example of that. I guess Ha-Sung Kim a little bit. He's been one of those guys that people rally around, but I think more of those types of guys that just kind of bring the juice, bring the energy on a regular basis, kind of regardless of how the team is doing.
what's interesting is if you talk to players, they say a few things. They say, oftentimes they'll say, it's never the manager's fault. We shouldn't rely on the manager or the coach to get us fired up. We're professional ball players. We should get ourselves ready to play, and it's on us. But then at other times, they'll kind of backhandedly say, something's not right with whoever is leading this team. So players have it kind of both ways on that. I was always under the impression that Melvin would fix that because he was such a professional manager that they would be where there were some things with Tingler and Andy Green that were a little funky and almost minor league-ish and amateurish within the managerial position of the Padres, that Bob Melvin was a professional major league manager and he would have this team ready to go every single game, major league style. That hasn't happened this year. So that's been surprising to me. Rah-rah guy, I don't know. That's Ozzie Guillen has worn out his welcome in a lot of places. So
maybe not that rah-rah. That's like
rah-rah.
aggressively
I
rah-rah.
see your point, and it's totally logical, especially when you look back to this Padre team in previous years. They played with such flair and style and pizzazz and love for the game and so many late inning rallies and so emotional and just so much going on. And that has all been absent this year for whatever reason.
Yeah. I think one credit to Bob Melvin is like the wheels haven't completely fallen off, like they've had to rally often. They've had to, as he said, pick themselves up off the mat. And so, I think like kind of the vibes in the clubhouse certainly could be a whole lot better. But I think, the fact that they've continued to put together a somewhat professional operation week to week. Some games look pretty ugly, but then you go and take 2 or 3 from the Dodgers. Like that team in 2021 was not taking 2 of 3 from the Dodgers unless I completely missed, something at that point. Same with 2019. The fact that they're doing that, like, I don't know, maybe that's something to do with the Dodgers, but at least they kind of seem to show up more regularly on a professional basis, even though things aren't awesome. Our buddy Rafa seems to be chiming in. What's he got to say? What happens when they open up a managerial search to input from their stars who already don't seem to be jiving together and their wishes don't align? It's a good question. How do you navigate some of these dynamics? If it's a Tatis guy or a Machado guy. I saw somebody on Twitter bring back the old Ronald Acuna quote about what got him going this season. He said his work with Fernando Tatis Sr. during the offseason. And he said that during the All-Star break. And so everybody's like, well, Fernando Tatis Sr. for hitting coach, because obviously he's doing something right. Maybe Junior likes that. How would Manny or Soto or some of these, I don't know if they would or wouldn't. And, I think some of kind of the dynamic stuff between the guys might be a little bit overblown. Because again, when everybody's playing well, things are great, and we're not having any of these questions or concerns. But I think that is an interesting thing, unless, of course, it is just AJ Preller kind of unilaterally making the decisions and saying, hey, I like this guy. I've been grooming Ryan Flaherty for this position for years now, and that's what we're going to go with. Obviously, he's got the connection with Manny Machado, but I think that's another thing I will be very curious about if it comes to that. Like, what kind of true search is there, as opposed to like, was Bob Nightingale onto something with the Ryan Flaherty thing, and is that kind of a foregone conclusion?
Well, when you're a successful and strong front office, you take input from your stars, but that input is not your final answer. You take the input from the stars on who they would like as a manager. It's crazy not to ask your stars, not to consider them. And then you make your own decision based upon information that you've gathered during the search, you've gathered in all your years of baseball, and the interview process. And you pick the best manager that you think. You don't just go with whoever your stars say. So Rafa, if they don't if they have different wishes on who the manager is, your job, whether you're a front office exec, GM of a baseball team, NFL or baseball team, you balance your stars, you balance the process, and then you are strong and you make a decision, and that is the final decision. So input, but not full 100%. This is where we're going from the star players.
And one last thing, because we hit on a lot of these topics from this
Yeah.
one tweet, but quickly on approach. I mean, I think that's the thing, and it's something we've talked about a lot at the plate. And I looked it up last night. Zone percentage, pitches they faced in the zone this year, third most in baseball, 51.6%. Their zone swing percentage, 44.2%, which is last in baseball. So there's like few teams get more pitches, see more pitches in the zone. No team swings at fewer pitches in the zone. And their swing percentage, I'm sorry, their zone swing percentage was 61.6%. That's last. Overall swing percentage, 44.2%. Also last in Major League Baseball. So teams know that they can just like pound it in the zone against the Padres, especially against certain guys that are going to be overly discerning, and they might be able to sneak a few past. We've seen that happen often this season, been kind of a source of frustration. Patrick was asking about Will Venable being hired as the next manager. I don't know about that. Chris, or is that Christo? Is curious about stats that matter and why I have a high school level knowledge of the game. Um, so I think and that's one of the tricky things about baseball is like we throw out all these numbers. It's hard to know like what really matters. Tom Verducci did the piece in Sports Illustrated about this being such a disappointing season, which kind of just turned into a piece about like the impact of OPS plus with runners in scoring position and how basically like every World Series matchup is like two of the top three teams in that stat over the course of the season. And obviously the Padres very, very bad from that standpoint. And so maybe OPS plus with runners in scoring position. I think that's kind of been a trend topic that we've hit on a lot this year. And so their struggles there, maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that record wise, obviously in close games, this team has not flourished.
Yeah, the close games are what separates an completely collapsed tank of a season from having a somewhat disappointing season, but you're still in the playoff hunt. You win those close games, a few extra inning games. It's a completely different conversation on this season because you can spin the metrics in baseball. There's so many advanced stats and analytics. You can often paint the picture you want to paint with those to either portray the story you want to tell about your team or either say, hey, the season's not as bad as we thought or it's better than we thought. But you just win a few of those close games, we're having a much different conversation.
Definitely. Logan, what does our starting rotation look like next year given Snell's likely exit, Darvish and Musgrove's injuries, lack of depth in the minors? Seems like we may have at least a couple starters or be at least a couple starters short. And
I
that's
think Logan's
interesting.
onto something there.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
what I have to double check is like Seth Lugo's contract is so kind of unorthodox. So
Yeah.
he's got the player option for next year. And so a guy that was kind of a great find and has been really, really good for them. They would have him for 7.5 next year. Want to make sure I have that right. And, you know, maybe he feels like, hey, I proved what I can do. Now he's 33. He'll be 34 in a couple months, you know. So age might have something to do with it. But does he think, hey, I proved what I can do as a starter. Now maybe I have one last chance to get a solid 4 or 5 year deal from somebody worth, you know, 15 or something per. I don't know. I'm not always great with projecting these contracts, but
No, you're 100. He would be crazy not to opt out of that contract after how he's pitched this season.
and so you're looking at potentially another hole along with Snell, and I think the assumption is that Snell is going to be too rich for their blood, given what he's done. Um, is that the phrase? Too rich for my.
Yeah,
Did I
yeah.
make that up?
No,
It sounded weird coming out of my mouth. Um,
you're
there's
verbally vociferous, dude, with your phrases.
Waka's got the mutual option for 16 mil next year, man. So his price is going up next year.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, you've got a few, and then yeah, the concern. I think Musgrove seems like less of a concern. It seems like he'd like to throw like an inning or two before the season is up. You Darvish, that's kind of the one where it's like, okay, how serious is this? Are we looking at surgery if that's the case? And we know how that goes with an elbow injury. I would think that, Waka, um, Musgrove, and then am I missing like Pedro
no,
Avila? Like
no. That's
we
why Darnay. That's why this year was such a disappointment and such a downer, because their pitching was set up for this year. This was the year. Like Soto, I'm thinking about the lineup. Musgrove, Darvish, Snell. Those are your top three guys.
Mhm.
Top three guys. You got Hader at the back end of the bullpen, and you have great years from what you expected going in from Lugo and Waka. You are not as sure in your starting pitching next year. This was the year. This was the year to win big. And those guys, and it's next year is a huge question mark. And there's not a lot of pitching on the free agent market. I don't know how much the Padres will be even available to spend on the free agent market. And as we talked about routinely, they're not operating from a position of strength as far as trading guys unless you're going to fleece the farm system again. So I think they're in a real hole for starting pitching next year. There's not an abundance of pitchers. They don't have anyone coming up the pipeline, and their best pitcher is a free agent who is going to command huge, huge dollars. This year was imperative to win with starting pitching. They had it set up. Snell's last year, Hader's last year. It's on the back end of the bullpen. It's a problem.
Yeah, Robbie Snelling is 19, projected to arrive in 2026. And again, that can always change. Dylan Lesko, 2027. So, a couple years out. Jairo Uriarte, 2024. So potentially 21 years old in double A. He's done some good things this season. Adam Mazer, 2025. He's 22 years old. So maybe like you're hoping that those guys kind of develop and have a good year for you, a good off season for you, and get a little bit closer. And maybe it's not to start the year, but maybe by mid year they're able to kind of come in and do something. I think there was some hope that those guys could contribute in some way as they moved
Right.
up the system. Alec Jacob, we saw him briefly, so maybe he's a guy, but again, you're kind of relying on a lot of unknowns there when you're kind of
And
in this win now mode.
here's the thing, though. History's not on the Padres side for this. When was the last time they developed a young pitcher who had success at the major league level in San Diego with the Padres?
Mackenzie Gore.
I repeat the question. When was the last time the
Yeah.
Padres developed a pitcher in their system who came to the big league, stayed in San Diego for an extended period of time, and had success with the Padres? I'll believe it when I see it.
Greetings to Pastor Vicente Silva, who is watching from Brazil. Uh,
What
glad,
up?
glad you're with us. Let's run through a few more quickly. Only got a couple more minutes. Jeffrey, who are our options for right field next year, assuming Tatis takes over at center field? It's a very interesting one, and it opens up some questions there and possibilities. If you move on from Trent Grisham, makes sense that Tatis is in center field, bring in somebody in one of those corner outfield spots. Hopefully somebody with some pop. It's kind of always been a difficult thing to kind of find. And then Tatis answered some of that. But you get a guy that just doesn't do something for you defensively that can contribute at the plate, because that's the issue we've had with Trent Grisham. And so that'll be an interesting dynamic. Maybe it gives them some options. You could find a center fielder, could find a corner outfielder, and Tatis is that piece that you can kind of move around depending.
Question for you. If Tatis moves to center field, will he bunt with the bases loaded down 4-0?
I don't think so.
All right.
I think he's
Just wanted to make sure. I hate to say this, but I have a funny feeling that the Padres outfield next year will either be exactly the same as it is, or it's going to be Tatis in center, Soto in right, Profar in left.
You can't. I think Profar came up and he just nice bench piece, good
I hear
clubhouse
you.
guy. You can't be an everyday guy.
I agree. I just have a feeling.
We already answered the blow it up question. There's one that really got into the weeds of like what they're seeing pitching wise. I looked into that a little bit. Clubhouse chemistry, egos, kind of touched on that. How much would it cost to get Coach Prime to manage the Padres? I think that's a
Oh,
great
I like
question.
that.
Probably too
I like
much.
that.
Profar's value, role, fit for next year. Bench guy, clubhouse guy. Let's not get carried away.
Yeah.
Why yet another manager is not the answer. I think we kind of touched on that. Like, I think this is generally a pretty pro Bob Melvin podcast. And again, like covering the guy and well respected in the game. So I would be in support of them bringing him back, but it's hard to tell if that's going to be the case at this point. And man,
Is there a Hassan Kim question in there? Something about contract or a trade or something?
no Ha-Sung Kim questions.
No Hassan. Yeah.
But he's going into his last year, so we'll
Yeah.
see. Another guy to pay. This was good, Todd. Appreciate you you hopping on and let me fire all these questions at you and you handle
Yeah.
it with ease.
We got viewers in Brazil and we got people all over the world on Twitter interacting. I dig it.
So yeah, thanks for chiming in. It was fun to I try and come up with different ideas for it, but I was genuinely curious, like what do people want to hear about? Because we've been having a lot of the same conversations, and so this has been a fun exercise. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it as always, and we will be back with you next week.
See you later.